Welcome to Q&A practice. Let's start with the defense attorney. Ready? Here we go. Did Dave Roberts seem forthright in his conduct on that stop? Objection, vague, sustained, prior to 5/10/12. Have you ever received training as it relates to recognition of persons under the influence of drugs? Objection, relevance beyond the scope. Yes, sir. Sustained as to beyond the scope. Request to go beyond. Granted. Thank you. So you have received that training? Yes, sir. Prior to 5/10/12. Yes, sir. Dave Roberts appear high to you at all on that day? Not based off my observations. No. Had you ever had contact with Dave Roberts before 5/10/12? Yes, sir. Do you remember about how long you remained on the same watch with Dave Roberts? I believe I worked graveyard from March of 2010 to June of 2012. And so if Dave Roberts was also on that shift, do you know if he remained on the same shift with you through at least that time? Yes, sir. And during any of your contacts with Dave Roberts during that period of time, did he ever appear to be under the influence of controlled substances while you were at work? No, sir. Have you ever received training at that time period of March of 2012 through June of 12 that you must report misconduct of other officers to superiors? That I received training during that period? Well, did you know during that period whether or not you had an obligation to report fellow officer misconduct to your superiors? It's in our policy, so misconduct would be noted. So if you had seen Dave Roberts high while at work, would you have to report that to your supervisors? I believe it would be my obligation to report that. Yes, sir. You never saw that activity, did you? No, sir. Thank you, officer. Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor. Based on that same training of seeing when someone's under the influence of drugs, did you come to the conclusion whether that young lady was under the influence of drugs that night? I didn't test her that night. I wouldn't remember right now. No. Okay, well, did you test Dave Roberts that night? No, sir. Okay, did you ever test Dave Roberts? No, sir. Okay, did she ever? Officer, let me ask you, why is it when I asked you about Jan Collins, your answer was that you didn't test her? When defense counsel asked you about Roberts, your answer was no. I was just answering the question. Okay, did she give you any reason to believe ever that she was under the influence of drugs on that night? Yes. No, sir. Okay, did you ever find any money, $100 that night from her? Objection, no foundation. I can rephrase. Did you ever see any money being produced at all that night? I did not remember seeing any money produced that night. No. Nothing further. Thank you, officer. Any additional questions from the defense? None, Your Honor. Thank you. May this witness be excused, or does he need to be subject to recall? He can be excused by the defense. Excused. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. You're excused at this time. Thank you. You're welcome. The people recall Sergeant Hall. The people want to make sure you get your exercise in, sir. I'll remind you, you're still under oath. Yes, sir. Mr. Drake, you may inquire. Yes, Sergeant. While we were talking about the recording device, Peoples 1, I forgot to ask you while you were on the stand earlier, can an officer go back in time to previous recordings? Yes. And when you go back in time to previous recordings, is there some kind of time stamp on it? Yes. Includes the date? Yes. Okay, nothing further. Thank you. No questions, Your Honor. All right, you may step down, sir. Your Honor, the people rest their case subject to the admission of people's evidence. All right, very good. Then I'll see counsel at sidebar. Else we have. Excuse me. All right, we'll start with plaintiff attorney. Ready? Here we go. Okay, but it was brought to your attention, Sergeant, that there were drug items on the scene. Is that true? Such as a syringe or beyond the syringe? Beyond the syringe, yes, including different pipes, right? Yes, okay, and there was also other evidence indicating that there was drug use in the house that you were aware of, right? Inside the house, counsel? Yes. Do you recall telling Detective Byers and Detective Lewis that there were small amounts of meth found inside the house? That's what I was. Objection, improper impeachment, sustained. Okay, were you aware of any small amounts of meth found inside the house? Just what was told to me. Okay, I didn't actually see it myself. Were you made aware of that while on the scene? Do you recall? I want to say yes or no because I think I was just recently made aware that the drugs were not actually in the house but in someone's purse. Okay, that's why I'm hesitating answering the question. Have you had a chance to review the interview with you, Sergeant, of myself? Yes. Would it be safe to say that it's unclear whether you recall certain things based on what you actually saw on that day as opposed to what you recently read? It is unclear. Okay, but it is clear to you that there was no evidence at all that you were made aware of that someone was diabetic at the house? I was not aware of anyone being a diabetic. It was not brought to my attention. All right, and Sergeant, how long did you say you've been a police officer for? About 21 years. 21 years. Does it give you any hints or any idea if next to a bag full of syringes there's a spoon with some type of residue on it? Does that give you any idea of what those syringes might be used for? Yes. What would that be? If you get a spoon with some residue in it, it's going to be associated perhaps with someone who's using heroin. That's how they turn it into a liquid. They pull it into a syringe, and that's how heroin is used. So additional drug usage, yes. Okay, is it your testimony, Sergeant, that you would expect someone, if there's no indication of legal usage, such as using it for some type of, what was the diabetic, thank you, I have a cold, for a diabetic, and there's all this other type of indication of drug use in the house, that should be collected. These syringes, the spoon, these syringes, 40, yes, it should have been collected. Okay, you wouldn't leave a bunch of syringes with someone that might be on probation for drug use, right? I would not. In fact, you wouldn't leave a bunch of syringes. Well, you were aware of other illegal activity at that house too, right? Yes. And what other illegal activity was? Some type of check fraud, is that right? Yes. Something that you kind of specialize in, true? Yes. Would you say that your focus at the house was more towards your specialty of that check fraud as opposed to the different drug usage or drug items? Yes, it was. Okay, while you were in the house, for how long did you stay? About 10 to 20 minutes. 10 to 20 minutes. Do you know how long all the officers were there for? Do you have any idea, Sergeant? No, I do not. Now, while you were at the house, were you made aware of the fact that the different drug items was brought to one of the young ladies' attention? I don't recall, counsel. Okay, all right. When you, the syringe, yes. The syringe, yes. I was thinking of the spoon and just the syringe, yes. When you gave that interview to Detective Lewis and Detective Byers, do you recall saying that drugs or drug items? Objection, improper impeachment, sustained. Is it your testimony, sir, that the young lady was made aware of there was things in the house that she could be arrested for? Yes. And it's also your testimony that on 5/10, when you were interviewed, it was your belief that she was in fact arrested. That's what I thought. Yes. Do you recall while you were on the scene anyone mentioning the bag of syringes to her? Do you remember? I just don't recall. Okay, do you remember on that date on 5/10 of 2009 when you were asked about whether those bags of syringes were brought to your attention? You stated yes, that was one of the things he had mentioned earlier, something they could charge her with. Do you recall saying that? I recall reading it in the report, yes. Okay, do you remember saying that, or do you remember just reading it in the report? Can I just look at the report just to get a better idea? Would it refresh your memory, perhaps? I've got it here with me, yes. With the court's permission, yes. Page 3, I'm going to direct you. I can give it to you right here. This area that I highlighted, I think it's the third paragraph down, counsel. All right, counsel. Did that refresh your memory at all, Sergeant? Yes. Do you remember telling Detective Byers and Detective Lewis that you did in fact hear someone mentioning the bag of syringes and that she could be arrested for those? Yes. Okay. Do you remember who mentioned the bag of syringes to her? I honestly don't. Okay. Now, one of the things that defense counsel was asking you about was whether police officers have discretion to arrest, and I think your answer was yes, right? Yes. Let me ask you something. If someone is on felony probation and you find drug items in their closet and that they're high on drugs. Would you make that arrest, sir? I would make yes. Okay, nothing further. Redirect. Yes, thank you, Sergeant. I can't remember if you testified today, so I'll just ask you, did you believe that a test for under the influence had been conducted on Ann Ryan at 5/10 of 2009? I believe this is the interview. I'm not asking about your interview. Okay. I'm asking about your recollection now, whether or not you remember that being done or that coming to your attention then. Oh, I think someone did do a field test on her to determine whether she was under the influence. All right, so that's what you think. Is that true? Yes. Okay, so if it turns out there was no test of her, your belief to that would be incorrect, right? Yes. Objection, relevance, overruled, right? Pardon, did you ask something, sir? No, I said right. Okay, go ahead. And so quite a bit of your response to Mr. North is based on your beliefs, but some of those beliefs may not be accurate. Is that fair to say? Yes, I believe your testimony today was it's been a long time and there's many things you don't remember about that evening, right? I'm going to object as to leading. Sustained, actually overruled. You may answer the question. The question again, counsel. If I can have the reporter read back, I'll do it. I believe your testimony today is it's been a long time and there's many things you don't remember about that evening, right? Yes. Would it be fair to say, as a sergeant, you are not free to bury your head in the sand when you go to a call? Absolutely. You've got an obligation to make sure things are done right? Yes. And even if you leave a scene later, I'm going to withdraw it. Do you know if a police report was prepared in this case? Yes. And do you recall if it was Officer Vincent who prepared that report? Yes, it was. And you approved that report, right? I did. And you have an obligation to make sure that the report is done right? Yes. And you had certain information available to you on that night of 5/10/2009, right? Yes. If you thought something was done wrong in that case, you had an absolute obligation to make sure it got done right. I do, yes. And according to that report, only Ms. Perez, a non-resident, was arrested, right? Yes. And your testimony here today as well, you think that Ann Ryan could have been arrested. If that was the case, you could have directed Officer Black and Officer Vincent to go and arrest her, right? And we will stop there. That will conclude our Q&A practice.